Okay.
Welcome everyone to this first hardware management meeting on the new platform. This is Bernie Meier, and I have with me on the call John Leung, who will be presenting the status, I guess, of the OCP profile work effort ongoing. Before we do that, I would kindly remind you to use the link that's in the hardware management wiki to go and self-register if you can. Actually, with this new system, I guess Kaylee will be able to send out an attendee list at the end of the meeting. So we get a good count of who was there. As far as the agenda goes today, there's really only that one item. It was going to be either Mike Bugenhagen or in this case, John Leung. If there are no other items to be discussed today, I think I'll just turn it over to John. Thank you, John, for doing this.
Sure. Okay, do you see my screen yet?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So this isn't a long presentation. I was actually going to give most of the time to Mike Bugenhagen and talk about UCPE. So the first thing is earlier this month, I got agreement from, close this thing. Okay, by the incubation committee to allow the hardware management project to proceed along this path as diagrammed below. So what I presented was this construct where the hardware management project would create a baseline profile, and then each of the more platform-specific profiles could reference this hardware management baseline profile, and then create additional capabilities above it, and make requirements of different parts of Redfish based on what they want to do. So in the case of UCPE, they would, I guess, begin to influence the telco profile to start with the baseline and extend it up for their particular needs. And so this is not, quote, approval of the construct. It's more a go-ahead that they wouldn't object if we start to move along this process. So the caveat being that the individual platform projects can decide whether they want to align with this approach. So most of the work that the Redfish Forum has done fits nicely into the hardware management baseline profile and then the server profile. So we've the group has actually split the two, so we can reference one from the other, and we can use this as kind of a template that we could do for the other verticals. Any questions? Okay.
No.
So
That's good.
Okay, so yeah, I was trying to figure out how to forward this thing. So one thing that the Redfish profiles do have is that, yes,
John. Hey, I do have a question. On the rack, can you go back to the prior slide?
Sure.
So on the rack and power profile, I envision that there's two potential hardware candidates that would use that profile. One would be a power shelf that would be directly connected, onto the internet through into an internet connection, and be managed by some workers. The other would be I'll call it a rack manager that somehow aggregates these devices together. So first off, is that my understanding that it would follow the rack and power profile, or that profile would cover those two types of devices?
Based on this, I would let the rack and power project figure out how they want to extend the baseline. And so if they envision two constructs on top of this, one for rack and one for power, that would be fine. I just put them together because it was a single project which dealt with both of those.
Okay, that's fine. No, I understand.
That answer your question?
Thank you. Yep.
Okay.
Actually,
so the redfish profile.
This, I guess there's a little delay here on my end. That actually means then that these are more the sub-projects, right? So if, for example, the server profile may choose to have more than one type of profile, that would be okay, right? Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
Just like with rack and power, there might be a rack profile and a power module profile or something like that. There could be other individual profiles, perhaps even applicable in the telco project. There might be more than one profile.
Yes. So if the needs of the CPE is different than, maybe a rack-based telco platform, then I could see multiple telco profiles.
Okay, and it's just not to limit it to these. Okay, great, thanks.
Correct.
So, John, that brings up a point. Maybe in order to prevent having, dozens of profiles, maybe what we want to do is establish just kind of the, nomenclature that, it's the network profile and it's a, chapter within the network profile where we segregate, this equipment, or a chapter within or a subsection within the rack and power profile. I don't think we want to get, 24 different profiles that we have to talk about.
Correct. What my concern is the overall construct, whether I put profiles with an S in parentheses or not on each one of these is up for the IC to provide guidance. Once one is created, then I'm okay, right? And so the IC needs to go provide some direction on whether it wants 20 profiles across all of this, or whether it wants to limit particular projects to 1 or 2 profiles.
Okay, I think we're going to have to make a recommendation just based on the lack of a lot of feedback from the IC. I suspect that we're going to have to provide some guidance on what to do.
Bill, John, I guess I see this profile as including the interface and the data model. Is that right?
I'll go into details exactly what the profile.
Because there may.
So this defines the.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this profile would include both interface and anything else that we wanted to add in the profile. So I think that was a discussion within the IC that most of this presentation is based on the interface, i.e. Redfish, but the profile itself could be define additional things. So Redfish's concept of a profile is strictly interface based, and OCP's concept of a profile could be the interface and other things that it wants to collect up into its profile.
Okay.
So this particular presentation is strictly if we just look at the interface aspects of an OCP profile, how would that be expressed with Redfish construct? Yeah, and if there's a delay in the presentation, it's my fault. You know, I'm in Japan, so. Okay, we're done with this slide. This
I
may
think
take
so.
a full hour. Okay. Anyway, so talking about the interface aspect of an OCP profile, a Redfish profile construct allows a required profile object or property, and this allows one Redfish profile to reference another Redfish profile. So this can easily be utilized within the construct from the other page, where we define an OCP baseline profile as a Redfish profile document, and then define an OCP server profile interface profile, which basically references it. And the example on the right is exactly that, where we have an OCP server version 1.0 JSON, and it has a reference to some version of the OCP. Okay, so the rest of this slide was actually Bugenhagen, but this is just so I can go through, right? Once we have decided its file, this OCP baseline profile, the DMTF has actually created both of these examples of both an OCP baseline profile, an OCP server profile that OCP can begin using as a baseline for its discussion on whether it wants to augment and place additional requirements or not. So I can go through that entire file. It's a JSON file. It's very straightforward. I think Jeff Otter has gone through the construct itself of how you make recommended and required declarations within that JSON file. So I didn't want to go through that again by walking through the entire file. So I've tried to create a visual mechanism for at least this group who doesn't want to understand all the JSON aspects of it, to just be able to look at something high level and say whether it's sufficient for a baseline, especially since this a baseline profile will be viewed by the other projects, and I didn't want every project to have to go figure out what the JSON constructs were and try to interpret those. Okay. So very quickly, so these are the the JSON basically specifies the resources, the JSON, the Redfish resources that need to exist, and then within each of the resources, the properties that need to exist, and that's all expressed in JSON itself. This is more pictorial of what you would expect. So with Redfish, as soon as you have a URI, you can do a get on that URI, get the resource, and it will return a JSON document to you that you can go interpret with Python and get whatever name value pair you're interested in. So what this says, this diagram says, is that these are the types of objects that would have to exist, and then the following slide would show the properties within those resources once you do a get on it. So this tells you at the top level on the service root, you need a chassis collection, blues are collections, and then the whites are the singletons underneath them. And so I believe if you read the JSON, it says you need a chassis collection, and then you need at least one instance of a chassis. You need a manager's collection, and you need at least one instance of a manager, and then you need a session service and an account service. And the account service has an account collection, and you need it doesn't have a specific requirement on minimum, so I set minimum to 0, that you could in fact have an account with no instances, and the end user can decide that to create all the accounts. So you don't have to have a system with at least one default account. Okay. And then, so within your instance of a chassis, you need a power and a thermal object. And then within managers, you need your log, which has log entry collection and then a bunch of log entries. And then you need a management interface. And then you need the protocols that go across that management interface. Okay, any questions? Great. So the follow-on slides is basically for service root and account service. These are the required fields that you would return. So if you do a get on service root, it will return you a JSON packet. These are what are required. There may be other entries in there, but from a conformance standpoint, these are the ones that are necessary for you to be conformant to a OCP baseline. Okay, and the way you read the follow-on slides is this is just a snippet from the master diagram from the previous slide. Red are the resources of interest that we're trying to understand what properties are needed. That's it. And so it's fairly simple to go through these diagrams very quickly and say, I'm not going to go through all of them because this is just an interpretation of exactly what the JSON file, JSON profile is. So for chassis, this says you need chassis type. Asset tag is a recommended. Manufacturer properties are required. So the way I've done this is all boldface says you're required. And with serial number, these should be conditional. So these two should be conditional in that it defines you can have either one or the other. And then, oh no, sorry, that was in systems. So this is correct. So this is, you have to have SKU on power state systems, and you're recommended to have a serial number and part number. And then you are required to have power and thermal, which is what we've shown on the follow-on slides. And then you have to have a link of the computer system and whatever is being managed. And then for power, if you get that back, what's required is power control. And within that, all these are recommended as to what is returned. And so Jeff, I know you're online, so if I misinterpreted the JSON, I know you'll correct me. So, but this is just a quick way of showing people how to kind of staying with the markup structure. So since we kind of train people to look at markups as to exactly what the return markup might look like. And so with thermals, you would have fans which are required, redundancy. Oops, fix that. Misspelled redundancy. And then if you get a redundancy, you should have these particular properties. So you should have the redundancy set. Minimum number and that maximum number is recommended. And the if implemented is that if you don't have redundancy, then you don't show this. But if you implement it, then you should have this redundancy object to show your redundancies within the system. And for managers, so this is an instance of a manager. Would have its firmware version, its network protocol, the pointer to interfaces, pointer to service log, and then the chassis it resides in. It manages and server manages. And then in this particular case, this manager should have an action, which is a force restart of the manager itself. And then within log service, it should have an action to clear the log. And then each log entry should have created entry type and message and severity. As mandatory, it may have other main value pairs. Ethernet switch, Ethernet interface. So this is pretty straightforward on the properties we believe is mandatory enough to have that. So what this what the OCP hardware project would do would be to either bless this as, yes, this is necessary and sufficient, or whether we want to make additional properties within the schema mandatory. So I think a lot of the work can be done at this level, and then the obvious translation to the redfish profile can be done pretty straightforward. And then RW is it's recommended that they be both read and write for both the host name, the name servers, and the FQDN. And then this is the network protocol. So this is what protocols are supported and what port to go find them in. Okay, and so that is the server of what would be in the baseline. So the position that I would start with is that this is the baseline that needs to be supported by all the vertical profiles. We may consider taking this to each of the other projects and saying, okay, this is the baseline we want to make. Right? If this is a burden to anybody, let's go whittle this baseline down to the minimum baseline that everyone will want. If there's stuff that the servers want, right, and telco doesn't want, then it just gets moved into the telco profile out of the baseline. Into the server profile out of the baseline, and then the baseline will be quote common, and but servers would still have the functionality that it needs to have. Okay. And so the next slide is actually, okay, once you have the baseline, we now can go create the server profile, which is just a extension of the baseline. So this is the baseline as we diagrammed earlier. And so for a compute server, you would just have further requirements of you'd have to have a system collection, at least one system collection. It has its own log service, and it has its own Ethernet interface. And then following those is exactly what's in that system. So same notation is that you have to have system type, asset tag, and actually in this case, I believe the construct is that you may have either one part, either part number or SKU. Don't necessarily have to have both. Can't have neither. So this just indicates that there's further conditions upon the requirement, and it's not a pure mandatory. You have to actually look at the schema. So you would have to have a memory summary, a processor summary, the BIOS version, and then the ability to boot. Okay. And then the Ethernet interface, so there's a separate one. The way the profiles are written is that there's only a single construct for the Ethernet interface resource. And it's annotated for whether it's attached to the manager or whether it's attached to a system resource. This allows you to break it apart and see if you're only interested in servers to see what's needed there. I believe that's it. Yep, that is it. So the way I would do this is to have us own the baseline, this project, and then take this server profile to the server project and let them do the same assessment on whether it's necessary and sufficient for what they want to do. Okay, any questions?
John, I just have one. How much do you expect the server committee to provide in terms of technical detail?
I think they can be guided. I mean, I presented Redfish to them and the concept of profiles, and if the question is, do they know enough to actually make these assessments about whether it's sufficient? Is that your question?
Yeah, I guess I think we have to, lead them to the answer and give them, a pretty good baseline to start with, and you kind of use their expertise to help, add to that baseline. But I think we have to give them something that's, let's say 95% complete.
Okay. Yes, and that's one of the reasons the Redfish forum actually created these two profiles, is that we did the yeah, so we actually created this contract. Can you see this too? I don't know if I just showed my entire screen or not.
Yes, we can see that.
So this is actually the JSON for a basic server profile that the Redfish forum created, which is the basis on which I did my diagrams from. So this was kind of putting the crumbs on the ground as to which way they could go, which way they could follow. And so this is all in the concept of baseline. And I know in the IC discussion, there was a debate on whether the baseline should be low or whether the baseline should contain all the capabilities that we really want a server to eventually have, like firmware update. Right? So firmware update, the update service is not in here at all. But the Redfish forum is also creating, what is it? Is it basic server profile, which actually has all the possible capabilities that are expressible with Redfish. And so I suspect that whatever server comes up with will be somewhere in the middle between this basic server profile and the full-fledged profile, server profile that Redfish is also coming up with. So they can choose, like they can look at both and they can say, hey, well firmware updates on the full-fledged one, and we really want that in the server baseline. Then it's a simple matter of being able to pull that across. But then they have the full menu from which they can select them. And if you believe that we should go make that first level decision and give them even more breadcrumbs to follow, then we can go do that. Okay. And so the way I would see this actually materializing within the hardware management project is to create a spec similar to this, which basically lists, so this has referential document on what the Redfish is and what a Redfish profile is. And then it actually has a listing of the entire hardware management baseline profile, and then in the back with a normative reference saying that the normative reference is the JSON file itself, and here's where OCP has placed that JSON file. So the document itself is no longer purely normative, but the actual JSON file is normative. And then in the discussion of each of these resources, you can have textual explanations of exactly what's expressed within this JSON file. And so in my particular case, I don't think I've done that much other than, here's the diagram, and here are the excerpts of what is expected within each of these. So someone who doesn't want to go through the JSON can actually go pick this document up and easily figure out what types of information he's required to provide.
And John, this is Jeff. I just comment that we'll have that we'll have this type of document will be able to be automatically generated by our document generator. We've got a contractor working on that project right now. So for folks that don't want to consume the JSON, we'll have a way for you to just look at it more look like a Word doc than a computer printout.
Are you going to circulate this initial draft?
Well, given that I wrote it an hour ago, probably. Yeah. So I was actually waiting for the output of whatever this tool is, because I think it's in a table format. So Jeff can explain exactly what. So I don't know exactly what format this extractor is from the JSON format, but I didn't want to get people too used to this format if we could auto-generate it directly from the profile itself. So I would probably wait to get those examples and insert those in. But the overall structure of the document would be identical. Both the insertion of the entire JSON file and then a sectional chapter on each of the resources which are being required, so you understand what the properties are. So I can post this with the necessary caveats.
But the danger is that it might look different, not look like this. That's well, it's not danger, but you know what I'm trying to say.
It's an expectation.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, then, how much of this baseline profile maps to, for example, the mock-up that's already available on the DMTF site?
I believe the mockups have more capability than the baseline. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, we're talking about the OCP mockup.
That's correct. The proposed OCP Redfish mockup is like number 844.
It should be about the same.
Jeff could actually answer that, because I believe he. Right.
They were identical, but that was before we split the profile into the baseline plus server, and so it also does not comprehend any of the changes or the sort of the different goal, I think, from OCP side in terms of what we think that final deliverable will look like now from a what the requirements are, but they are, at least they were in sync when we started the split work of this, and so there might be some minor differences now, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that was added or removed, so they're really close.
Okay, they may just be moved into different subsections or something.
Well, the only difference could be some things that maybe were added or removed, or I think we've had conversations about things that we would expect to have in the profile now that are not necessarily in that were not necessarily shown in that mock-up. So you can, if you want to see the, I guess from a comparison standpoint, it would be good to look at that proposed OCP implementation mockup that you mentioned, and compare that to like the rack mount 1 server or any of the other mockups. And so you'll see that the OCP proposed one was a very skinny implementation. And so it would be good to get feedback from from the members as to the looking at what's available or what is capable in the interface, and to see, well, what else would you like to have? Because as we said, we built that skinny mockup based on the remote machine management spec. So there was we tried to cover base only and not.
And
Okay.
I thought that was the original feedback from the hardware management project.
Yeah,
Was
and I think
that you wanted minimum guidance. That's what it is.
Hello, I have a couple questions.
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, I didn't know if you could hear me. This is Jeff Catlin from EdgeCore, and we are or have been implementing Redfish support on top of numerous of our networking devices. And so I had a few questions around that. So the first one is, I know when our guys set off to do the initial Redfish implementation over a year ago, I think it was a year ago now, they followed the Intel RSD type of architecture. Does that map into, or is that the same as this type of Redfish architecture documents you're showing? Or is there any differences between the two?
Yes, there are differences, but we're trying to align those in the future. So when Rackscale was created, first Redfish came out in August of 2015. It had a small set of resources that it had most everything we wanted. And for those models that weren't complete, right, we threw them off the bus in order to get 1.0.0 out. And then we've gone and on a regular cadence of 3 times a year, continue to create additional models as they get finalized and done. So Rackscale, having been created 2 years ago, had to go create some models, Redfish-based models that the Redfish forum had not had time to go create. So there's a kind of a bifurcation of there's some models within Rackscale that don't appear in the standard itself. So what Intel is committed to do is to work within the Redfish forum to create standardized models of that. And as they become available for Rackscale to remove its proprietary model and replace it with whatever standard model exists. So you'll see differences, but that's because we did Rackscale before all the models were complete.
Okay, so
answer your question?
I think so. So our implementation may not map what you have here, and our implementation would have to change as the Intel Rackscale models change. Is that correct?
Yes, but if you're looking at the major resources here, which are chassis and system, those are identical. Right? I'm talking about models for so Rackscale created an Ethernet switch. Yeah, we just created it, out of thin air, and right now we're in the process of working with IETF to create a more standardized model based on Yang mappings. That's taken a while, but as soon as that gets done, then Rackscale would remove its Ethernet switch and replace it with the Ethernet switch constructed from Yang constructs.
Okay. All right. Second, I guess, comment or question is, we're implementing this without a BMC controller. So I don't know if that's part of the requirements or thought to be a requirement for this implementation or architecture you're proposing here. So I guess it's just a comment. And I guess as that pertains to some of the baseline functionality, without a BMC, some things might be a little tricky. For example, firmware update without a BMC controller on a network switch. If there's a NOS installed, usually the NOS takes care of its own update, and I don't know how we'd work that. So that's one thing. Power off is another thing where without a BMC, we can hold the switching ASIC in reset, which is very similar to powering off, the server portion of a design, but it's not exactly the same. So I guess I would like to be careful on what's put in the baseline design or the baseline architecture here, that it could be adequately supported without a BMC controller. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
So with my DMTF hat on, the DMTF position would be DMTF defines interfaces, and which are we don't care about implementation. And so as long as you adhere to the interface, and we construct conformance test suites to test against that interface, then how you implement it is purely up to you. So if you want to implement it on BMC, great. If you want to implement it on the NOS, great. You're just an interface as far as we're concerned. So taking my DMTF hat off and putting my OCP hat on, now OCP may decide that this interface needs to be constructed on a BMC for servers, right? So it's up to each project to decide based on this profile where that implementation can or cannot reside.
Well, I guess my comment was getting back to your, my comment was getting back to your picture that showed a baseline that went horizontally across all projects, and putting things in the baseline that were mandatory that may not be able to be supported by a Redfish implementation without a BMC controller. Now, I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but that was my only comment. Not all devices that support this implementation will have a BMC controller.
Hey, Jeff, is that common implementation to not use a BMC?
Well, we don't have the only networking products that have BMCs on today are the wedge products. And we ship those, but we certainly ship a lot of other products without BMC controllers. And I think what we're finding is a lot of people don't care so much about having the controller itself on the board, as much as getting the traditional BMC type management information out of the device. So, I guess our opinion is you don't really need the extra money to buy the controller and the power and all that other stuff to have a BMC controller to get the BMC type of information. And I think, with a Redfish implementation on top of the control plane processor that's there anyway without a BMC, we can achieve that.
Yeah, so I guess this is where we want to, make sure that we vet it out in the project teams and make sure that we don't actually force a particular implementation. Because I agree, I wouldn't want to do anything in the profile that forced us to add hardware. Particularly if there's a way to implement this in the service processor.
Right. Okay. Okay, those are my only questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm done.
Okay, is there, well, just to continue on that line of thought, is there even a BMC resource defined in the baseline? It's in the list of managers defined in the mockup, for example, but it's not, at least not what you showed as the basic baseline.
Well, the baseline says you need a manager collection and you need at least one manager. And that manager is usually the BMC.
Okay. But you can have
so I don't know if we explicitly within the profile say, well, you name this thing a BMC, and then there'll be no confusion, or whether we just say, hey, it's one manager.
No, it's just that you needed a manager so that the functions of that, so that the functions tied to the management, that the housekeeping of the system, those management functions that just needed a home. But no, it does not have to be a BMC. And yeah, there's lots of really anything that's not an x86 server, any other piece of gear usually doesn't have a separate processor, because if you're talking to something, you're already talking to the service processor that's it's managing the box anyway. So the BMC is definitely a general purpose compute construct.
So to answer Jeff Catlin's question, then I guess the baseline doesn't require it to be a BMC. Anything that fulfills that manager role can be reported, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So it sounds like at least we don't have any
Yeah,
roadblocks.
that's if there's something there may, you know, I'm not saying there's something that didn't accidentally creep into the model that supposes that. So we'll want to make sure that that's you know, tidied up. But that was certainly the intent, was not to require a physical piece of hardware. It was just trying to get the software functions.
Right. So if telco networking says, yeah, I've got a manager's call, it's called service processor, then
That's fine.
the profile is happy with that.
Yes.
Okay, next steps. What are you proposing here? A period of what? A soak period, a review period. We send you comments.
I would have a review period and send back comments on whether this is a sufficient baseline for each of the platforms. I think moving forward, we'd have to go and present this to each of the platforms so they can have the same feedback that we just got, right? Which is, you make sure that we're not putting hardware requirements on anybody.
So Bernie, why don't we put a plan together that says, hey, we have Summit coming up in March. Let's put a stake in the ground on what we want to, talk about, say, present, roll out at the Summit, and then back up from there on what we need to do between now and then.
Okay. Absolutely. I'm game for that. Then we can have something to present or to have agreed on by the Summit. That would turn around to John. Do you think you could get it presented in each of the sub-projects by then? And that would be enough time to agree? I guess we could just, tell them.
I think, right. So I think I can get it presented, right? Because that's mechanical. It's a matter of incorporating their feedback back into a new baseline.
Well,
so
John,
if all of them have varying,
you're working on the baseline, but also we need each of the 5 profiles done as well. Is that correct?
No, we don't. No. We just I don't believe we need all 5 done, right? We need for me to roll this out as OCP, we just say, hey, this is the construct we're going to use. Here's an example of what we've done for a baseline that each of the vertical projects or sub-projects are okay with, and here's how we've done it for servers. And then in the future, each of these other projects will roll out their particular profiles. But that proves the methodology, and it gets us a baseline which is not burdensome on any of the other projects beyond server. So I wouldn't try to drive each of the projects to kind of come up with its profile in time for the announcement.
But at least each sub-project would have had to have time to look at the baseline and say, yes, we like it, or no, we want this added or removed, and we will have our own additions at some later point.
Correct.
I guess I'd like to see, a plan from the hardware group on, what that overall plan is for the 5 profiles then.
You mean how we're going to work with those profiles, other profiles, to get them done?
Yeah, and a timeline to do that, to have that completed. I don't think it's unreasonable to set a timeline for, the other projects to, for them to, vet out the profile and come up with an initial, initial profile.
Okay, so on this slide, right, based on the IC discussion, it was individual projects get to decide whether they even want to align to this. So if you're saying that we're going to be more aggressive in saying you shall align, right, and not only that, then we're going to set a timetable on which you will align, then that's a far more aggressive statement than I heard earlier this month.
Well, I think you got to, set the expectation with them that, hey, this is what we'd like to do. Let's try to work together to figure out how we get an initial profile set, for storage or networking or telco, right? I mean, if you don't do that,
right.
then, any plan, any date will get us there, right? Which is, in my mind, is unacceptable.
Right, but that makes that second bullet far stronger directional, right? It's not can, it's shall or should.
Well, hey, no, I'm okay if they, if they want to come out and say we're not going to do it, and they have a legitimate reason, then, then they're done, right? There is no profile. They have an unmanaged solution.
Okay, so there's a decision tree that they need to go through, which is will they align, and if they align, we'd like to see a schedule on when that profile will be available.
Yes, yeah, and what I'm suggesting is that I think we have to give them a straw man schedule on when they, when you'd like to have that done.
Okay. I'm not certain about the backside, right? Because I'm driving the hardware project, right? So to me, it's up to the IC leaders for the other projects to start driving their groups to deliver.
You're right. No, I understand, John, but okay. I mean, you have some insight into how this process works. If this is a 3-month process to do this, then it would be reasonable to say, okay, I've been down this road. I created the server profile. I know this is how long it takes to, write the profile, to get the feedback, to resolve it and finalize it. And, it's X months. So therefore, here we are on, end of November, and add X months to it. It's reasonable to have it done by this date, right? Some future date.
Right. So I to me, I'd let the storage project go figure out. I would provide the assessment of exactly what the format is, and this type of presentation, and say, okay, so you guys go set yourself a schedule as to when you're going to go deliver a storage profile, which extends the baseline.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm okay with that.
And again, if they decide, hey, we're not going to have a storage profile, we're going to just use the baseline profile in 2018, then that may be an adequate direction or decision. I mean, I think as long as we have a baseline profile, these groups may decide, hey, we're not going to go implement an additional profile on top of that.
So Bill, this Jeff Kaplan again. So a question on that. So are you saying that the baseline profile will be mandatory for all groups and the group specific profile will be optional, or are both pieces optional per group?
Well, Jeff, what I'm trying to achieve, I think what all of us want to achieve is have a well-managed, predictable platform, and across all of the OCP products. And in order to achieve that, we have to have some type of coordination across, these 4 or 5 verticals to do that. And at the end of the day, when we get to the point where we have a profile for all of all of our equipment, all of our OCP equipment, we now have a hardware solution that the entire software community can build upon, and they can build, really good orchestrators, and they can optimize their applications to use this baseline plus device level profile. And so I really think it's advantageous, for us as an organization to, put a stake in the ground, and that stake can be at the baseline, or it can be a baseline plus, a device profile. So on networking, if we have a baseline profile and we have, specific additional properties that we support, and those properties provide additional telemetry information, and we put a stake in the ground and say, at some point we would recommend all, OCP network devices comply with the network profile and the baseline profile, we should have a product that is better managed and is more efficient and, delivers more value to an adopter. And
I agree with you, Bill. I was merely just asking for clarification. I wasn't trying to disagree. I think everybody's supporting at least some common baseline is a really good idea. Then all the OCP equipment can at least be managed to some degree, regardless of what group it's from. So I think that's definitely something that is attractive.
And there may be an argument by one of these groups that they don't need a profile. Okay, I mean, I don't know what the content's going to be, so I can't say that they absolutely have to have one. There may be sufficient requirements or sufficient telemetry information coming from the baseline profile that maybe we don't have to have a rack and manpower profile in 2018. So I'm leaving that. I'm leaving that to the discretion of the the subject matter experts in those groups, and certainly respect their opinion, right, and their direction.
Okay, but I think John still proposed that we should have baseline plus server just to prove the methodology by Summit. Is that a good enough stake line? Stake in the ground, Bill.
So, would the intent then would be to roll out the baseline in detail?
I believe that's what John was proposing, right?
Right. Yes. That means we need feedback from each of the other vertical groups on what that baseline should look like.
Right. So the summit is also a good time for these other groups to, have sessions on, the content of their profile. Would you also recommend to them that they schedule, kind of a 1 hour or 2 hour work session at Summit to detail out their profiles?
Yeah, I guess I would leave it up to them to decide that, whether it's at the summit or some other time during the year. The summit would be ideal, I suppose. But for sure, we could have a workshop if John or Jeff are amenable to it to, again, go over the profile and explain, maybe even have a sample implementation from somewhere. I don't know how quick that can be done. Probably a bit too aggressive, but I'm just thinking out loud. Oh, something happened.
No, you're still here.
Yeah, I guess I'm still I'm trying to understand. There seems like there's a hesitation to drive this forward.
Well, not from my part. I don't think from Bill. Sorry, from John or from Norm. I don't think that's an issue. I think that it may just take time. But others can join in and state their opinion. I don't think there's a hesitation.
So I have no hesitation doing this for the server profile because I think we have buy-in. I don't think we have buy-in from all the other verticals. So that's my only hesitation, right? So if you guys are confident that we'll get some buy-in, then we can move forward.
I don't know, Jeff.
That's why
Jeff Catlin, what do you think will be the response for the network group?
I can't speak for them. Personally, I think a win for OCP would be at the summit to come out with the hardware baseline profile in detail and state that that's a requirement for all of the vertical groups to support going forward. That could either be for any new designs coming out, or some amount of a date for previous designs, or whatever. Someone could decide that, but I think it's very important to have a required baseline set that's supported by all groups. I think by Summit trying to come out to say that the all of these 5 vertical groups will have some sort of skeleton for a profile, it may be a bit too aggressive, but I think launching the baseline is good, and stating that's required for all groups. I think coming up with the server profile as the initial proof point that there is a need and an architecture that supports additional profiles per group on top of the baseline is important to show that. And I think once that's done, the other groups will follow based on customer requests and feedback for functionality.
Great, I agree with you completely. And maybe what we can do is go to the other project leads and say, at Summit, we're going to, assuming that we can get there, we'll make an announcement. This is the profile, and we'll target a time frame in which products should meet that profile, and to let the other project leads know that this is what we plan to announce, and if it would behoove them to move their project ahead and get an initial profile together to be part of that announcement.
So Bill, I don't know how this would work then. The mechanics of this, as far as I'm concerned, this is definitely a great plan. I haven't heard any objections on the phone, online for this plan. So now the next step is to inform the rest of the groups. There'll probably need to be some coordination work done at the IC level as well, between the various interfaces to the sub projects, and then we probably just need to have a statement saying this is what we're doing at the OCP hardware management level, and move forward with that. And until we get a major roadblock or pushback, plan on having that sort of an announcement at the summit.
So John has the buy-in from IC. You guys can certainly work, across the, work with the other project leads, to coordinate that effort and start doing that immediately. I think the real, at this point, this group should move forward with the, the baseline profile, finalize that document, and tee up a conversation at the IC meeting, as you know, and get them to agree or to accept that document prior to summit.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with that plan.
And then in terms of, you know, what we say or what we can say, you know, that'll be up to, you know, that'll really be up to, you know, John and Bernie and, you know, others. We'll figure out what, you know, how to, you know, what message you want to articulate at the summit.
And then I guess going after that, there'll be some sort of question by everybody's like, okay, so if I don't implement the redfish OCP profile, am I still OCP compliant, and these kinds of things, right? I think that's a little bit of what Jeff Catlin was echoing. Maybe I misunderstood, but there'll be some point where you have OCP gear, and hopefully all of it will be managed with a OCP profile from redfish.
Well, if I was the project lead, I would be making a recommendation to the IC on a cut-in date in which, you know, all products should comply with this after that cut-in date. Certainly wouldn't make it retroactive, but I would certainly put a stake in the ground and say, after this date, you know, your recommendation as the hardware management project lead that, you know, that the IC not accept any products unless they comply with this baseline profile.
Yep.
And that could be per platform, right? So you could have that sooner for servers and maybe networking.
Absolutely.
That's probably what the cut-in dates are. They don't.
And yeah, but I mean, honestly, you know, the sooner that this profile gets locked down and we have products that comply with it, you know, the better off we are, right? And companies that comply with that product will absolutely have an advantage. And we will figure out how to, you know, market that advantage on the marketplace. I mean, I think the other thing, Bernie, that we need to talk about is you know, how do we, you know, what do we do to enable, you know, the compliance testing for this? So I don't have to talk about that today, but I think there is, Redfish does have some, you know, kind of self-test scripts that work, and we probably should talk about how, you know, how those are implemented, and, you know, how do you enable these different groups to do that?
And Bill, yeah, we have the open source tools for, you know, for validating a profile against an implementation, and those are free open source tools.
Right. So again, I don't think there's any work here. I think we just want to, you know, help give guidance to the groups and say, hey, the expectation is that, you know, you use this open source tool, you run it against your product, and, you know, and as part of that submission process, you are, you know, acknowledging that you've ran it and it does comply with the, you know, the tool, right?
Jeff, I guess the tool spits out some sort of pass, no pass, or percentage. Then
it fits on a report. We're trying not to make it. You know, we do want something that you can hand to somebody and say, yes, I passed. You know, and obviously if there's there's going to be a lot of you know, additional information. But yes, yeah, we're working on it to try to get to some simple output so that you can have your participation trophy piece of paper. You know, that says I did this and it worked.
Yeah, it's more of a possibility to take that sort of a document, a certification, and store that along with the other artifacts that are stored in the package that's submitted to IC for, you know, approval for compliance and statements and things like that. Right, Bill?
Yes,
So, okay, but I guess those details can be worked out specifically and how that's done. But all right, I think we have a plan. I will work with John and whoever else will do it on the mailing list to come up with some with a proposed date. Of course, the for a compliance stake in the ground, as you call it. And of course, we'll need to hopefully get something agreed on in the weeks before the summit so that we can make an announcement. And I guess OCP's marketing and folks will help out on that, sending out some sort of a press release or something. Okay, great. Good to move forward. Any other comments? I think we're quite a bit over time now on this meeting. Nothing else? All right, John, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you all for attending.
Hey, when's our next meeting, Bernie?
Yeah, I'm just looking at December 5th, 6th, 19th, December 19th.
Okay.
That's okay, right? I think it's
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, our next meeting is December 19th. Hopefully we'll have a planned with dates, and we can review that, see how far we've come. Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and we'll see you then.